Okay, great. Welcome to the second session, which is meant for question and answers, but not yet, please. I want to let Alan speak a little bit more about the end of his Iwama days and what happened afterwards. But I want to start where we left off the first session. So, Alan, if you may retell that story that from Mito, which is the town just north of Iwama, please.
Okay. Well, I won't talk about the details too much because I think like these. I think I'm kind of cautious with the content of a story like this because it can become entertainment sometimes for people. But basically, I'd been in Mito teaching because that was usually what would bring me there. And then I'd gone to see a movie and I came out from the movie and I had, let's say, an epiphany. So kind of hard to describe this thing and probably best not to. But basically the basic content of it was that it was preceded by a very clear perception of the world around me, and there was some kind of experience, but it's kind of an experience that wasn't an experience, and out of that there was, let's say, like a really deep-seated realization, a sort of it's like that kind of feeling or sense that basically, so easiest way to sum it up is that basically everything was perfect as it is, it always had been, it always would be. So
that's beautiful.
That I think is the main kind of content of it. These things, it's very difficult to talk about because again, in one way it can be entertaining, but in another way I think it's just because it's not an experience like having a roller coaster ride or drinking hot chocolate. it just doesn't have that quality to it. But I mean, it was a very powerful realization, I guess, for want of a better word, and spontaneous. I mean, I wasn't sitting meditating or doing anything spiritual at all. If you were looking for how to do it, the movie I'd seen was Mel Gibson doing Macbeth. Now, I cannot recommend that to you as a spiritual practice. So that's all that preceded it, and that happened in before we went to India.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe in the autumn or something like that. So that definitely decided me on having to do something other than what I was doing.
No, and I think your reluctance to speak about it as a normal experience, I completely understand you, because it's as I can understand it from my own understanding, it's a cognitive, it's cognitive depth of understanding that is, because when I heard you, when you spoke about it, that has stayed with me ever since. I remember this. I even remember how you experienced the world around you, which I don't think is quite a beautiful experience. People going, but that kind of landing of cognitive understanding that is coming from a depth that you it's part of you. It's part of you. And if I don't want to put words into your mouth, but and I think we spoke about this in the mission, it's something that stays with you, something that is with you at this moment.
Yeah.
And I remember when we then went to India, and when we spent time in Kathmandu, and when you spoke to my spiritual teacher, is that he was very like, Alan, I remember the talk he had with you. He's like, Alan, you do get what I'm talking about. And you just like, yeah, I do get it. But it's like, it's too much. So there's a cognitive understanding. There's a clarity of apprehending what lack of a better word, what the spirit is indicating, what the spirit is pointing to. And you mentioned the word consciousness, and that is maybe more of a less, that maybe has more of a quality that we can relate to without overlaying it with superstitious ideas or superficial ideas about what spirit may or may not be. Now, I think coming back to Iwama, then
you're freezing up on me a bit, Bjorn.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah. It's better now, I think. Yeah.
Okay, good. So then you spent another year or 2 years until 93, and I remember that Lewis had a book called The Principles of Effortless Power by Peter Wollstone. That kind of, he didn't want to lend that book away, but I kind of like, give it to me, and we kind of read that book, all of us there, and I was blown away. I was like on the cloud for 2 weeks, and we were all kind of got excited to read about another martial artist who had deep insight, not only into the martial arts but also into cognitive spiritual understanding based on inquiry and direct introspective, contemplative work. And I remember for myself vividly about that period, but because I know that led, maybe not at that time, but later on it led you on to go and meet Peter.
Yeah, so I mean, certainly at the time the book was there, and we were just saying in intermission. I mean, everybody was and I had a look at the book and I went, I don't need this. So I don't know why I picked that up again. So the time frame is, we went to India and then on to Nepal, and I did some trekking in Nepal and then traveled through Southeast Asia, and so I spent 93 in Japan, and then I left at the end of 93 because I really felt like I was just spinning my wheels, and I was just it was a nice life and I was enjoying it, but it wasn't taking me anywhere. So I packed up and left, and went back to New Zealand, and somehow I bumped into the book again. And then somebody brought Peter to New Zealand in the mid-90s, I think. So, I mean, he'd retired. He'd stopped teaching in California, and he was living in Hawaii. So he was sort of pulled out of retirement and brought down to New Zealand. So I went to see him because I've heard of this guy, and I was just blown away by him. And so he's very impressive as a martial artist, and he's I mean, it was the first time I met somebody that I went, oh, okay, I understand how people might have been impressed by Wei Shiba, because it's not normal. So I started training with him, and I think I probably spent about 10 years, including an apprenticeship in Texas with Peter in 2010. And his work is amazing, and the consciousness work that he does is very powerful. But it's just as far as I didn't want to be a consciousness guru, and I was really only interested in communicating, practicing the martial work and communicating it to people. But it's too hard for people in lots of ways, and it's a bit fraught because people get tied up with themselves and confused. So a year or two after actually being in Texas with Peter, I just went, I'm not teaching this anymore. So he's with Saito Sensei. He's probably my most influential teacher. I think certainly as a martial artist, he's the most extraordinary person I've seen. And his consciousness work is really powerful. But like I said, I mean, I've no interest in being a guru for people. I think it's too much responsibility. So I'm not interested in providing that work, and the martial work is it's just too big for most people to handle. So it's there in my Aikido, but it's less and less. I'd say less and less apparent to people where that material comes from, which is fine, except that I think Peter is owed recognition for being hugely influential in my work. So,
that's great. I just kind of yes, I just want to give you some time also to recollect your feelings and your learning process from Saito Sensei in Iwama that preceded meeting Peter, and also now is the work that you do now. Your beautiful dojo in Auckland, and the Aikido work that you do. So how was Saito Sensei that influence on you? And
well, I guess, I mean, he was very central to all of our time in Iwama. I mean, I wasn't in Japan for any other reason than to practice Aikido, although I was doing other stuff. So I was also studying tea reasonably seriously. But I mean, he was definitely central to things. He was central in lots of ways, because as you know, like how you thought he felt about you mattered quite a lot. Like, you didn't want to upset him. You wanted to make sure that he that things went smoothly between you and him. On a student teacher level. But I mean, he was just a fabulous teacher, and I think I really appreciated Saito Sensei much more after I left Iwama and saw him when he was teaching overseas, because out of that Iwama training, when I'd go and be uke for him, I would sort of smack my head and go, actually, none of us were really doing what he was doing when we were in Iwama. And I think the thing that one realization I had is I always thought when I was uke for him in Iwama, I thought, wow, he's so good. He can do this and be so relaxed. And then after Iwama, going back and touching him, I went, oh, he's so good because he's so relaxed. So he's so good because he's so relaxed. So, so I started to think a lot more about not just the technical component of how to make a technique work, but sort of, like at least physically how you had to be more effective. And, I think Saito Sensei was an influential sort of role model, a strange one, because he had some difficult things to his personality and his lifestyle. But he was truly generous and truly committed, and a very brave man, I guess, or a man that had real courage and commitment to what he was doing. And I certainly saw that near the end of his life when he couldn't train anymore, and you really, in a way, somebody who was removed from actually the only things that they did, which was train and garden, and you really, but there he really is, even though he's immobilized and he's in a bed. It's like really this is him. This is the man that person who was there. So that was I think important to me in lots of ways, that kind of process with him. And of course, my relationship with him was much smoother after I left Iwama. I'd go back and, you know, he'd invite me for dinner and you'd sit and have dinner with him and stuff that never would have done in Iwama, you know, so quite different.
Yeah. Then did Peter Olson then give you a lot of input about the principles that you then maybe did that help you then to find your Aikido?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm not sure if I've found my Aikido, but yeah, I mean, definitely Peter's work, because what Peter's tried to do is really extract the principles in lots of ways, and just physically, there's a huge amount of material there, but there's a huge amount of stuff in relating that's just I think most people don't see, you know, because there's the power there and the sort of the skill, but there's this whole other thing about you know, like relational skills, and of course in a martial context they're manipulative. You know, you're trying to have a very effective relationship to the downfall of the other person, and he makes no bones about that. And I think that's you know, and he would you know, he would say that you probably don't want to have personal relationships in the way you would have martial relationships, and I think that's kind of a hang up in Aikido, is trying to work out, yeah, you know, you harmonize, you know, and it's all lovely, but it's still me who stays standing and you who ends up on the ground, and I think it's very difficult for us to come to terms with that. So there's a lot of nice thinking about it that I'm not sure that Weishibo had or even meant. I mean, there's that famous quote from his 50s where he said, you know, you join with the other person in order that they do what you want. So, and I'm, you know, I mean, he could do that all through his life, right? He was the man. So I think he's a difficult model for how we're going to embody Aikido principles.
It's interesting you say that. I did meet Peter Olson 2 times, and I went to see his dojo when it was in Oakland, California, just briefly together with Patrick. And I'm, like you, very, very impressed by his skill and the way he moved. And I had then also just briefly seen him in Amsterdam when he did a Chinese sword kata with the one hand sword. I never seen anything like it. My mouth fell open. It was like, it was so beautiful, so smooth, and so together. Yeah. So, but I never practiced with him more than that because, well, I did my own, had my life and far away from Peter Olson. But the book had always stayed with me, and I think is one of the best books written about the subject of martial arts with contemplative practice, because he has some beautiful insights there. Now, that's a whole big subject in itself about insight and personalities and what spirit implies regarding selfishness and ego and all of that stuff. That's a big subject. We're not going to go into it now, but just in regarding to your martial principles of what you're speaking about, I totally agree with you that Sensei probably did not have the thoughts about Aikido that maybe many people have about Aikido today. I think I've been learning a lot about it the last few years from the internal teacher that I have met in Dan Harden. And I never met any better martial artist than him, and incredible. And so I feel like a fresh beginner again. I'm just have to recalibrate my system, kind of, and which is really, really wonderful. Which is really, really wonderful. It is fantastic, and it's crazy to say, but the lockdown has been a good period to do personal solo practice, and which I never had the effort or couldn't be bothered to do. So it's been a blessing in disguise, really. It's been really good. So that is fascinating, and that's a whole chapter in itself. And being a novice at it, I should be speaking very, very quietly about it. But it holds tremendous insight. And also, what I'm learning is that a lot of the Shinto mythology that is awash in Japan. Yeah. You see it in the temples, you see it in the rituals, you see it everywhere. Suddenly you go, oh, that's that, oh, that's that, oh, that's that, oh, that's that. And you go, wow, they're all, what is this? And it's preserved. Like you said, the Japanese people are not necessarily religious, but it's interesting because all of this knowledge is preserved in their mythology, in their traditions, in their ceremonies. And the people doing the ceremonies doesn't necessarily need to have an inside knowledge of it.
No.
It's like hidden in plain sight, like Ellis would describe it.
I think it's like, in the West, we're very interested in what people believe. And in Japan, people are much more interested in what you do. so like you enact these things, and as far as like some sort of religious ceremony goes, so long as everybody enacts it together, it's serving its purpose. So there's no. They don't have to get wound up in their head about whether they believe it or not or whatever, and that allows it to kind of wash through. So and then I think it gets encoded in specific situations. I mean, certainly you can look at what Sensei was saying, and there's lots of ways that you can, that he's being both metaphysical and pragmatic at the same time, and like where those two leave off is really enmeshed.
Yes.
What Peter's tried to do is be very, very clear, but it means that he's created this whole language that you've got to kind of step into. It's like you'll have a word that he'll use, and you actually have to discover what that word is, right? And it is specific. He's not just pissing around. He's talking about something specific, but unless it's within your experience, you're just talking about something you've never seen. So
I like that. That's great. That's fantastic. Shall we let questions in, Alan?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why don't you unmute yourself, please, if you have a question, and because we are not many of us here, so we can have an open room. Don't be shy.
It's all the New Zealanders, they've heard all this before, poor guys. So we have a drink, like a fizzy drink in New Zealand that that its logo, or it's like its byline, is world famous in New Zealand. I'm feeling like that at the moment.
Not to worry, but definitely we have plenty to cover anyway. So, well,
hello.
Yes, Judith.
Hello, Alan. I'd like to thank you. I saw your lesson last week, and one thing that I found was really useful was talking about thinking up and downwards at the same time. When I was using it myself, moving around the house, I found that helped my Aikido. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm sure that if you talk with Bjorn, he'll have insights on that, probably worded differently, but I mean, that's really classic Chinese, Japanese kind of concept, this idea, like a fundamental, I guess originally from Taoism, fundamental kind of relationship of the universe, of heaven, earth, and man, as this kind of interculator between the two. But it's definitely a physical thing. And I think some of the stuff that I was saying, during that little class was, we have a tendency to muddle priorities. So things that should be traveling up, we hang on to them, and things that need to be let down, we kind of draw up, and we end up in this kind of contradiction with ourselves. And we can imagine that in lots of ways, lots of ways that are both physical, but also, sometimes in relationships, and things that we muddle, and they can no longer serve their purpose. So allowing things to serve their function is much more powerful. And so just simply in your body, this idea that your head's rising and your feet are falling, and that you exist between those two things. So I'm also a structural integration practitioner, and Ida Rolf, who was the pioneer of this work, has a really lovely expression. She said that man is an event that occurs on a line between heaven and earth. And I think that's really, really beautiful in lots of ways, and that we're not a thing, we're an event that's occurring on that line. So I'm glad it helped. Careful when you ask me a question, huh? The answers are
good.
I really what you said about Saito Sensei as well, that he was powerful because he was so relaxed. That was quite meaningful.
Yeah, I think that's definitely so. I mean, I'm not sure how he got there, but we weren't relaxed in Iwama, were we, Bjorn?
No, only after training.
Only after training, yeah. And then not always.
But I took your concept of coffee plunger.
Yeah.
I like that. And
yeah. Yeah, you kind of, and then yeah. And I mean, imagery is really useful. I think that's something that's there in Aikido. Certainly in Peter's work, lots and lots of having confidence in being able to create what he'd call a feeling image for yourself. So something you need to develop. So imagine so much that you start to feel it. I mean, if you read the principles, I think there's several bits of imagery that he uses in there. Things like the ball on a chain hanging from your center, and these things can be really useful. And they're just made up. I mean, you just make something up that works. If it doesn't work, dump it and make up something else. So I remember somebody asking him, they'd done a lot of Chinese internal practices, and they said, well, Peter, shouldn't we be careful? My teacher said, you want to be careful how you use these things because you can make yourself sick. And he said, good. If you're so powerful that you can make yourself sick, make yourself better. So it's like we should have confidence in our ability to design things for ourselves, I think.
Yeah, I think this is great. Alan, what happened with your kind of coming home and establishing yourself in New Zealand?
Well, I came back to New Zealand. I didn't know what I was going to do. I wasn't at all thinking of teaching Aikido. And I tried a couple of Aikido classes here and there to see if there was something going on, and I was pretty ambivalent. But one place I went to, there was a guy there he was getting close to black belt in that system. And after the class, he said, wow, well, you're doing so much better than what I'm doing. Will you teach? And I said, I don't really want to teach. And he goes, no, would you? And look, you need a place to train and you need mats. And he said, well, if you had a place to train and mats, would you teach? I went, because I just said, that's what you needed. So yeah, I guess so. And a week later, he turned up. He said, I've got a place to train and mats. So that's how it started. So wow. He tricked me.
Is that the
place? And now I have this beautiful place, lots of students.
Is that the place that you have now?
No. It was a little scout hall. So we went through a few steps, yeah, now we've got quite a large space. So it's, yeah, I mean, again, I've been very just lucky. I'm a jammy guy. I've done plenty that could have worked out really badly, and so far I'm doing okay. Michael's laughing because he's probably, see, Michael can tell you the story of me being back in New Zealand. So I've not always managed things very well, but I've come out okay thanks to other people.
That's great. Yeah. Wow, that's brilliant. I think, have we covered everything?
Dean just took a big breath. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a question. You know me. I take a deep breath. Talking to yourself, listening to Miles, some of the stories Bjorn Sensei's talked about, and some of the other teachers I've been with, it seems everybody that really has achieved and is doing some pretty special Aikido has done something else as well. Some other kind of study as well, and brought it back to Aikido, and it just seems to have kind of taken them that next step. Just your thoughts on that.
Can I just say, Alan, what strikes me is that, you know how Iwama Dialogues, I'm more interested in the life story of the person that I'm speaking with Alan, with Miles, with Patrick to come. And when I look at Sensei's life story, just looking at his story, what he did, and you know, he, young man, looking for martial art, going to Hokkaido, coming back to visit this spiritual center in Omotokyo to see the Gucci, became his spiritual teacher. Just seeing this, all these different influences, which becomes his life. That's where I draw my inspiration from. And I see that he did not just go to one dojo and followed one thing. He was pursuing life. And of course, his life was partly martial, partly spiritual, that he kind of made his art into.
I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, if we think about Saito Sensei, he didn't do anything else. You know, he did Aikido and he grew vegetables. Hadn't
he done some karate when he came to Sensei?
Yeah. I don't think it was very much. I think it was probably as much as my karate. But I think, yeah, if you look at Sensei, what a, you know, I mean, even if you left Aikido out of his life, it'd be quite an interesting story to tell, right? But I mean, he had some very intense relationships with teachers as well, right? So his relationship with Takeda Sensei and then with Deguchi Sensei, I mean, really, really intense kind of, you know, both of those guys in their time sort of just completely monopolized his energy. But I think he also fought his way out of that as well. Like, he realized he needed his independence, you know, so at some point he needed to do it. He couldn't just be a great student or the leading student of Takeda. And I mean, even his spirituality is not really quite the same as Omotokyo. And there's reasons, you know, there's pragmatic reasons for both of those splits, but I think there's also a real need for him to somehow, like own his development. So going and trying different things, I guess, if nothing else, it breaks us away from just being, you know, purely committed to one teacher or one. It's not even the teacher. It's just being very narrow. And I mean, we can see that in people who study all sorts of things, that they get really good, but it's only sort of so much. So yeah, that's. So I'd agree with Bjorn on that. I mean, a really rich life that All Sensei led.
Thank you.
Great. We are coming to the end, actually. We got 3 minutes left. So unless there is something that is on your mind, I think we can. Alan, do you have anything that you want to finish with?
Oh, do I? Not in particular. I mean, I'd just say thank you, Bjorn, for the invitation to have a chat and indulge in some nostalgia. And you know, thank everybody for coming and listening to me for a bit. I guess I'm conscious that I was, because we were watching Miles, I was thinking, you know, how well he presents himself, and I tend to ramble a little bit more. So it's a stream of consciousness. But yeah, thank you all for turning up and for your questions, and you know.
Thank you for coming. And I think it's more than nostalgia, because in one way, when we're looking at that lifeline, we are still, wherever we find ourselves on that lifeline, we are in this very moment. So in one way, I feel it's not just nostalgia. It's not just looking back to nice memories. And the reason for this is to bring out that quality in our being, in ourself, that we have developed into. You know, that is with you. That is what you're speaking from today, and that's what we hear from now, and that's what I love about this. But anyway, thank you so much, Alan. And
thank you.
I'm going to put this out, and you all can watch this again, or you can share it with other people who were not able to see this. And next one up is with Patrick Cassidy Sensei. We haven't the date yet, but we should set it soon. Great. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Can I say something?
Yes.
I'd just like to say how nice it was to see that you guys in New Zealand can actually practice physically and you know, touch each other and actually do Aikido physically, and it's really nice because most of the world we can't do that at the moment. So I'm just happy for you.
Well, we're blessed, and I'm pleased that you feel happy for us. So I mean, I think we really do feel, yeah, just how blessed we are here. So we're hoping that everybody else will be able to practice again as normal soon. So hang in there. We're terribly impressed by everybody who's continuing to train under the circumstances that that we're blessed to be able to avoid at the moment. So yeah, so thank you. All right.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.